Okay, geometry students, today we are going to use hypotenuse leg in our proofs. If you remember, if you have the hypotenuse in the leg of one right triangle and it is congruent to the hypotenuse in the leg of another right triangle, then those right triangles are congruent to each other. Also remember that the hypotenuse is the side opposite the right angle and the leg is the side adjacent to the right angle. Let's look at this first example. If we are given that triangle LMP and triangle MNP are right triangles, and we see that they are right triangles because right here we have our right triangle mark. We also are told that ML is congruent to MN. Okay? They want us to prove that triangle LMP is congruent to triangle MNP. And they gave us some statements and they want us to list the reasons. Okay? Let's take a look at this first one. It says triangle LMP and triangle MNP are right triangles. If you look, that is one of the first things they tell us about these triangles. So the reason that we're going to give is given. The next thing that they tell us is that line segment ML is congruent to line segment MN. You look up there, we see that that is also given. Then we have the statement that MP is congruent to MP. The reason for that, MP is congruent to MP, the reason for that is reflexive property of congruence. It is the same line. Okay? Let's look at our triangle and see what that tells us. We know that they are right triangles, given there. We also know that the hypotenuse of those right triangles are congruent. ML is congruent to MN, that's also given. And then we know that MP is congruent to MP because it is the same line. So now you can see we can state that the triangle LMP is congruent to triangle MNP by the rule of hypotenuse leg. Okay, let's take a look at another example. For number 2, it says, given that WVX and YZX are right triangles. Okay, so let's take a look. We have WVX, that triangle right there, and we have YZX right there. They are right triangles. So let's mark those as right triangles. Help us see this a little better. So we have the right triangle right here, and we have the right triangle right there. Okay? The next thing that it tells us is that we have WV is congruent to YZ. So WV is congruent to YZ. That is a leg. And it also tells us that X is the midpoint of WY. It is the midpoint of WY. They want us to prove that the triangle WVX is congruent to the triangle YZX. Okay? They don't give us any statements, they give us one reason, but we can go ahead and fill out at least the first couple statements because we see here that WVX and YZX are right triangles, and we see that that is given. So the reason we're going to put here is given. The next thing that we're going to write is that WV is congruent to YZ. Again, that is a statement that we were given, so our reason is going to be given. Okay, the next thing that we can write is that X is the midpoint of WY. X is the midpoint of WY. That is the third statement we were given, so again, our reason is given. Okay, so definition of midpoint. If we look at our definition of midpoint and we look and see where our midpoint is on our triangles here, if X is the midpoint between W and Y, then that means that these two lengths will be congruent. Okay? And that tells us that WX is congruent to XY by definition of midpoint. All right, so let's go back up here and look. We know that it's a right triangle. They told us it was a right triangle. They also told us that WV is congruent to ZY or YZ. And we figured out, because of the definition of midpoint, that WX is congruent to YX. Okay, that means that this is going to be congruent. The triangle WVX is going to be congruent to the triangle YZX by hypotenuse leg. If we look, we have our hypotenuse, and we have an adjacent leg that is congruent. Okay, that's it for today.